tonight, don't come over. We need space. Those 5 bitter words from my daughter-in-law shattered me right there, echoing in the quiet room like glass breaking on tile. Drama at Christmas. 5 bitter words from daughter-in-law shattered me right there. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply folded my cardigan, set aside the small card I had written for my grandson, and zipped my suitcase with a steady hand. Beside the cinnamon candle on the counter lay an unopened envelope stamped with the seal of Rhodes and King, the law firm that had once handled my late husband's estate. I didn't open it, not yet, but I knew it carried a weight heavier than paper. Silence kills marriages, but sometimes it also erodes the fragile bond between mother and son. My name is Marion, widow, retired teacher, woman who had given her entire adult life to raising one boy, Lucas, and keeping a modest home together. Lucas had married Sophie 5 years ago, a woman polished, sharp, and precise. The kind of daughter-in-law who could organize a banquet but struggle to ask a simple question about how I was feeling. I had learned to smile politely, to fade into the background when she set the tone. Yet, even the most patient guest knows when she has overstayed an invitation. I placed a wool sweater into the suitcase, smoothing it as if smoothing over decades of slights I had excused. Forgotten birthdays, dinners where my chair felt like an afterthought, family photographs where my image had been cropped to the edge of irrelevance. Each omission was a bead dropped on the table, tiny, easy to overlook, but string them together and they spelled exclusion. Guests know how to smile, but mothers notice when their place is no longer at the center of the table they helped build. I picked up my phone and, almost instinctively, dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Lena. She had once dated Lucas, long before Sophie came along. She had a warmth that could turn a kitchen into a sanctuary. When she answered, her voice carried the same gentle cadence. "Are you all right?" she asked. I said only, "I need a place to breathe." She replied without hesitation, "Come, there's..."
Older, yes, but not yet defeated. In the hidden pocket of my purse, I placed the brass house key, the deed still in my name, next to the black USB labeled Maple. That single word was the street where Lucas had grown up. It contained documents, copies, records. Proof. I did not intend to use it tonight, but I felt safer knowing it was with me. Power, I realized, is not always about speaking. Sometimes it is simply about holding on to what others believe they already own. As I walked down the hallway of my apartment building, my neighbor Ruth was hanging a wreath on her door. "Merry Christmas, Marion," she called cheerfully. I smiled back, though my heart was heavy. By the lobby, I noticed the building's communal Christmas tree, twinkling under strands of white lights. Beneath it lay a small wooden toy horse, almost identical to the one Lucas had adored as a boy. I froze. Memory has a cruel way of placing itself right where you must walk, forcing you to step over it or pick it up. I stepped past, carrying the weight inside me. Driving out of the city, the streets glowed with holiday lights. A hymn played faintly on the radio, voices like wool mittens wrapped around a fragile flame. In the rearview mirror, the skyline shrank, just as my patience had shrunk over the years. Fear had dressed itself as endurance. I had stayed silent because I feared losing my son altogether. But silence had cost me more. It had cost me myself. On the iron bridge over the river, I whispered aloud, "Not tonight. I will not disappear tonight." I checked into a small lodge near the edge of a frozen lake. Room 7. Walls painted pale yellow, a single lamp glowing warmly. I set down my suitcase, placed the Rhodes and King envelope on the table, and poured a glass of water. The embossed lettering glimmered under the light. I could open it. I could wait.
Sometimes the greatest power is the ability to delay, not in weakness, but in clarity. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I would decide. I opened my journal, wrote one sentence, and closed it again. If silence is to be my choice, it will be mine to make. My phone buzzed again and again. Missed call already soaked before anyone admits there's a leak. For years, I had told myself I was imagining things, that it was simply life moving on. But in reality, I was watching my place in the family shrink like fabric left too long in the wash. At first, it was small details, easy to excuse. A birthday phone call arriving 2 days late. A family photo texted to me without a single word of explanation. The polite smile Sophie gave when I offered to bring pie, followed by, "Don't worry, we already have plenty of dessert." I brushed it aside, telling myself she was busy, that modern life was different. Yet each omission, each subtle dismissal pressed down on me like another stone in a pocket I was still expected to carry with grace. I remember one Thanksgiving vividly. I had baked my famous cornbread stuffing, the recipe Lucas grew up loving. When I arrived, Sophie opened the door with a look that was more surprise than welcome. "Oh, you didn't have to bring that," she said. Her voice clipped. I placed the dish on the counter anyway, only to find it untouched hours later, sitting cold while they passed bowls of roasted vegetables Sophie's mother had prepared. That evening, I washed the dish myself before leaving, hands trembling under the hot water. It wasn't about food. It was about space, and whose hands were allowed to feed the family now. Then came the photos. At Lucas's birthday party, I stood beside him while someone snapped a picture of him holding the twins. Later, when Sophie shared the framed photo, I noticed myself missing, cropped out cleanly, as though I had never been there. I laughed it off, joked about my unphotogenic smile. But when the slideshow at Sophie's parents' house rolled across the screen, years of Lucas's life played without a single image of me. My heart stung with a truth I could no longer deny. I was being erased. Polite texts replaced real conversations. "We'll let you know. We're keeping it simple this year." I would suggest a small gathering, offer to babysit, ask if I could stop by with cookies for the children. Each time, the answer came back wrapped in soft words, but carrying the same cold edge. No, not this time. I was not invited into their inner circle. I had become the optional guest, the one whose presence needed to be weighed against convenience. Dinners, waiting for someone to mention my name, my stories, my memories with Lucas. But conversations would shift seamlessly around me, as though my voice carried no weight. I smiled, nodded, excused myself to refill water glasses, hiding the ache that spread through my chest. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure disguised as courtesy. I told myself it was natural, that children grow up, marriages shift dynamics, and mothers step aside. But late at night, staring at the ceiling in the quiet house, I felt a burn under my ribs. Mothers do not stop being mothers because their children marry. They do not stop existing when another woman takes her place at the head of the table. Still, I convinced myself to wait, to be patient. Maybe next holiday, maybe next year they would remember the role I once played. But the pattern continued. Each year, the circle closed tighter. Invitations grew fewer. Traditions vanished. The stockings I had embroidered by hand hung untouched. The ornaments I passed down stayed boxed in the attic. The grandchildren grew, yet their memories were shaped by holidays where I was only a visitor, not a host, not even a constant presence. I could feel the legacy I had poured decades into slip through my fingers, replaced by curated images that excluded me completely. One evening, I called Lucas. His voice was strained, hurried. "Mom, it's just easier this way. Sophie likes to keep things simple." I wanted to say, easier for whom? Simple at whose expense? But I stayed silent. My silence had become their comfort, the lubricant that kept the machine of their life running without friction. And yet, each time I swallowed my words, I tasted bitterness that lingered longer. There was one final straw before Christmas that year. I had suggested hosting Christmas Eve at my house, Just a small dinner, nothing grand. Lucas promised to ask Sophie. A week passed with no answer. Finally, Sophie called. Her tone was flat, almost rehearsed. We thought you'd prefer to stay in your own place this year. Less stress for you. Less stress. Those words cut deep because I knew what they really meant. Less trouble for them. After that call, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the snow globe Lucas had made in second grade. A tiny tree inside. The fake snow.
Changes for excitement. The natural adjustments of newlyweds building their life together.
Over time, I realized the adjustments were not temporary. They were restructuring the entire house, and I was being carefully moved toward the edge. In the beginning, Sophie dazzled everyone. She was articulate, confident, the type of woman who could command a room with a single sentence. Lucas had always been quiet, gentle, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. With Sophie, he seemed brighter, as if basking in her glow. I wanted to be happy for him, I truly did. Yet beneath my smiles, I wondered if her light left any room for my own. When they announced their engagement, I expected joy to bind us closer. I imagined helping choose flowers, writing a toast, passing down the wedding quilt my grandmother had sewn. Instead, the plans unfolded without me. The venue was booked before I even knew the date. Invitations arrived in my mailbox with no personal note. Every decision was coordinated by Sophie's mother, from the shower to the reception seating chart. I offered to host a dinner, to contribute something small. "We've got it covered," Sophie replied with her smooth smile. Covered meant closed. The wedding day confirmed what I had been sensing. I was seated near the back, behind college friends and acquaintances who barely knew Lucas. When I asked him quietly about it, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "She just wants things balanced." Balanced. As if a mother's presence outweighed Pilates instructors on the scale. That night, I cried in my hotel room, still wearing my corsage. Realizing the distance between us was no longer physical. It was emotional, deliberate. Years passed and the pattern solidified. Lucas deferred to Sophie on every matter, from holiday meals to the children's routines. He used to call me weekly. Now, his voice was filtered through her preferences. "We're too busy right now. The kids need stability. We'll see what Sophie says." I could hear the hesitation in him, the tug of war between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to the woman who had raised him. Yet every time it was Sophie's voice that won. The subtle control Sophie exercised extended beyond logistics. Silhouette blurred by the space his wife insisted on keeping. The twist came during a family gathering at Sophie's parents' house. A slideshow of Lucas's life played across a wide screen. Childhood photos, college moments, their wedding, the twins' birthdays. I watched carefully, waiting to see just one picture of us together. Me and Lucas, mother and son. There were none. Not a single image. My presence had been erased, as though he had raised himself, as though Sophie had authored his story from birth. People clapped, laughed, and commented. I clapped too, but inside I felt the sting of betrayal. Not from Lucas, but from the careful curation Sophie had imposed. She had rewritten his history, and he allowed it. Later that night, when I asked Lucas quietly if he had noticed, he shook his head. "Mom, don't overthink it. Sophie just wanted to keep it simple." Simple had become a weapon, cutting away the roots of our bond. Simple meant silence, absence, invisibility. I began to see it everywhere. The way Sophie corrected Lucas when he mentioned old traditions. The way she raised an eyebrow when I suggested bringing a dish. The way she subtly dismissed my contributions with a wave of her hand. It wasn't open hostility. It was strategy. Control dressed as efficiency. And Lucas, my kind, gentle son, fell into line with each nod of agreement. The most painful part wasn't Sophie's control. It was Lucas's compliance. Watching him bend, shift, and shrink his voice reminded me of how grief had bent him after his father's death. Back then, he had leaned on me, trusted me. Now, he leaned elsewhere, onto someone who saw me not as a mother-in-law, but as an inconvenience to be managed. I stayed quiet for years, convincing myself that patience would pay off, that one day Lucas would see. But as each holiday passed, as each memory was curated to exclude me, I realized silence was not saving me. It was burying me. The question I could no longer silence echoed in my chest. When your son chooses control over connection, where does that leave his mother? And deep down, I already sensed the answer would come at a cost none of them expected. The first time Sophie, Lucas, and their children, as though I were merely an extra standing out of place. "It's nothing personal," Lucas said when I asked, his voice tired. But if it wasn't personal, why did it happen every time? The worst moment came at Sophie's parents' house during the twins' birthday party. They had prepared a slideshow, a montage of Lucas's life from childhood to adulthood. I sat among the guests, waiting eagerly to see even one memory of us together. Surely there would be a picture of him on my lap with sticky fingers from birthday cake, or one of us decorating the Christmas tree. But as the images scrolled across the screen, I realized with dread, not a single photo included me. I was absent, as if Lucas had raised himself, as if I had never existed. My chest tightened as guests clapped and laughed, oblivious to the ache in my silence. Later that evening, I asked Lucas quietly if he had noticed. He shook his head. "Mom, don't read into it. Sophie just wanted it clean and simple." Clean. Simple. Words that sounded harmless, yet carried the weight of exclusion. To Sophie, clean meant curated. Simple meant sanitized. My presence did not fit her narrative, so she edited me out. And Lucas let it happen. I began to notice other subtle omissions. At family dinners, conversations shifted away when I joined in. Inside jokes passed over me like I was invisible. Lucas once mentioned a childhood tradition of baking gingerbread houses, but Sophie quickly interrupted, saying, "We do things differently now." I smiled, but inside it felt like she was rewriting his history, replacing it with her own version where I no longer belonged. The mini twist came one afternoon when I visited their home unexpectedly. On the mantel stood a framed photo of Lucas at a pumpkin patch, holding both twins, laughing under the autumn sun. I remembered that day vividly. I had been there, holding one of the children's shoes after it fell off. I had been the one to take the picture. But in the framed version, the image was cropped. My hand, once visible at the edge, was gone. Only Lucas and the children remained. My heart froze. Not only was I excluded from memories, I was erased even from the moments I had created. I confronted Sophie gently. Their role as mother quietly edited out of history. One friend even suggested I take more pictures myself, as though proof of my existence needed my own defense. But family is not supposed to require evidence. Love should not need documentation to survive. One evening, I sat on my couch flipping through my own photo albums, yellowing pages filled with birthdays, graduations, Sunday mornings with pancakes. Lucas's smile beamed from every page, his father's arm draped over him, my own face weary but happy. I ran my fingers over the images, realizing that in my albums, the truth still lived. In theirs, I had already disappeared. It became clear that this was not about forgetfulness. It was about control. Sophie was curating not only their present, but also Lucas's past, carefully shaping a narrative in which she, and only she, was the anchor of his life. And Lucas, whether by choice or fear of conflict, was allowing her to cut me out. The boy who once called me after every safe drive home now deferred to a silence that weighed heavier than words. The hardest part was admitting the truth to myself. I had been replaced, not in Lucas's heart entirely,
But in this story Sophie told about him, the story she wanted others to believe. And as long as Lucas played along, I was powerless to stop it. That night, I stood before the mirror and asked aloud, if I vanish from their photos, will I vanish from their lives entirely? The question hung in the air, unanswered, but deep down, I feared the answer had already arrived. Yet one thought lingered, sharp and unresolved. Photographs may be cropped, but history cannot be rewritten forever. Somewhere, proof remained, and one day, someone would have to face it. That December, I told myself things would be different. Maybe the distance would fade. Maybe the old warmth would return. I began preparing for Christmas on the very first of the month, clinging to the hope that tradition could still anchor us. I unpacked each ornament as if I could hold a memory in my hands. Lucas's lopsided gingerbread man from second grade, the ceramic angel his father had bought the year before he died. I hung them carefully, believing that this Christmas might yet bring us together. I baked my cornbread stuffing in advance, froze it neatly in
No suggestion of a brief visit, just a line drawn, firm and final. I stood in my kitchen, hands damp from washing cookie trays, listening to her words echo. I didn't protest. I didn't ask to speak to Lucas. I simply said, "Thank you for letting me know," and hung up. Around me, the house glowed with lights I had strung by myself. Stockings still hung with the children's embroidered names. The gingerbread house kit sat unopened on the counter. Everything was ready for a family who would not come. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the basket of pajamas, folded so neatly they almost mocked me. I imagined the children's laughter, the warmth of wrapping paper scattered on the floor. Instead, silence filled the room, heavy as snowfall. I pressed my hand to my chest, realizing that hope can sometimes wound more deeply than absence. For years, I had waited for them to remember me. This year, I had dared to believe they would, and that belief broke me more than any outright rejection could have. The mini twist came when I discovered something tucked beneath the pajama basket. A sealed envelope I had written weeks earlier, addressed to my grandson. Inside was a card, hand-drawn snowflakes and a note, promising him that Grandma would always be there at Christmas. I had planned to slip it into his stocking. Now, the envelope remained unopened. A painful reminder that promises mean little when others decide you are unnecessary. For days, I went through the motions of holiday cheer alone. I lit candles, played carols softly on the radio, and wrapped gifts that would never be opened in my living room. Neighbors passed by with casseroles and greetings, unaware that behind my door, Christmas had already collapsed. I watched the snow fall outside and wondered how many more winters I would spend waiting for an invitation that never came. On Christmas Eve, I placed the untouched gifts back into the closet, next to old coats and forgotten boxes. I turned off the tree lights early, unable to watch them twinkle in a room devoid of laughter. Hope, I realized, is not always a light. It can be a weight, pulling you under when it's not returned. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, admitting to myself that something fun, Reminding me that my story was not finished, that decisions could still be mine. I blew out the last candle, whispering into the dark, maybe next Christmas will be different. But as soon as the words left my lips, I knew the truth. Different would not come from them. It would have to come from me. The night after Sophie's call, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The tree still glowed in the corner, but its lights felt harsh, almost mocking. I stared at the basket of pajamas folded with such care, now nothing more than fabric stitched with disappointment. My phone lay face down on the table, buzzing occasionally with messages I no longer had the heart to open. For the first time in years, I admitted to myself I had no place left in their Christmas. But then, something stirred inside me, a refusal to let the silence define me again. I picked up the phone and scrolled past the familiar names. Lucas, Sophie, Even my sister, who would only say, "I told you so." Instead, my thumb hovered over a number I hadn't dialed in years. Lena. Lena had been Lucas's first love, the woman who had once filled our home with laughter and warmth. She wasn't family by blood or law, but she had felt like it. When she and Lucas ended things, I mourned quietly, not only for their relationship, but for the bond she and I had shared. Still, she never vanished entirely. Every Mother's Day, a simple card would arrive with no return address. Just a handwritten note reminding me that kindness leaves echoes. I pressed the call button before I could second-guess myself. The line rang once, twice. Then her voice filled the silence. Hello? Just one word. And suddenly, I remembered the way she used to hum while helping me in the kitchen. The way she called me Mom without hesitation. My throat tightened. "Lena, it's Marian," I said softly. There was a pause, then a rush of warmth. "Marian, are you okay?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her about the folded pajamas, the untouched gifts, the words that had sliced me open. Instead, I whispered, "I just need a place to breathe." "No questions," she replied immediately. "Come, I'll put on a pot of soup." Her voice was steady, unshaken, as though no year about Lucas right away. Instead, we laughed over old movies, swapped stories about stubborn pets, and shared cheese and too much wine. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a guest tolerated out of obligation, but as a woman whose presence was wanted, welcomed. The mini twist came when Lena disappeared briefly into her bedroom and returned with a small stack of cards. "I kept these," she said, placing them in my hands. They were my old Mother's Day cards, the ones she had sent without a return address. She had made copies for herself, each one carefully dated. "I didn't want to lose the connection," she admitted, her eyes glistening. I pressed the cards to my chest, realizing that while one family had tried to erase me, another person had fought quietly to remember me. That night, as we sat by the fire, I confessed the truth. They don't want me there anymore. Not for Christmas. Maybe not ever. Lena reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "Marian, sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family that forgets you." Her words burned into me, not with bitterness, but with clarity. As the firelight flickered, I thought of the unopened envelope waiting back at my house. The one from Rhodes and King. Legal papers. Possibilities. Decisions I had not yet dared to face. The thought of them now no longer frightened me. Instead, it steadied me. Because for the first time in years, I remembered who I was before silence became my language. A woman capable of deciding, not just waiting. When I finally lay down to sleep in Lena's guest room, the quilt tucked around me, I realized Christmas didn't have to mean erasure. It could mean reclamation. The tree back at my house would shine in an empty room. But here, in this small cottage, I had found something far brighter. The reminder that I still mattered. And as my eyes closed, one question circled in my mind, pulling me forward into the days to come. If Sophie believed she had all the control, how would she react when she discovered she never truly did? When I returned home from Lena's cottage, the house felt different, not emptier. Emptiness had long been its companion, but sharper, like the silence itself. Purchased it with his pension and my inheritance. A gift to help Lucas start his family. We had drawn up an agreement. They could live there as long as needed, but the ownership remained mine. I had never enforced it, never even reminded them. Now, for the first time, I considered what it meant that the house was still legally mine. I called Gregory Fields, my lawyer of many years, a man who had guided me gently after James's passing. When he answered, his voice was steady. "Marian, what can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. "I'd like to make some changes. Urgent ones." We met the next morning in his office. The city outside was bustling with last-minute Christmas shoppers, but inside, the world slowed to a quiet hum. I handed him the envelope and explained everything. How I had been pushed aside, how Sophie controlled every corner of Lucas's life, how the children might one day grow up not even knowing who I truly was. Gregory listened without interruption, his eyes thoughtful. When I finished, he nodded. We'll draft the notice. They'll have 60 days to vacate unless terms are renegotiated. A strange calm washed over me. It wasn't vengeance, it was correction, a rebalancing of what had been stolen in silence. But that wasn't all. I asked about the trust I had set up years earlier for the grandchildren. It wasn't vast, but enough to cover education, to provide a safety net. Until now, I had left it untouched, assuming Lucas or Sophie would one day steward it responsibly. Now I knew better. I want control to remain solely with me, I told Gregory. And if something happens to me, I want Lena named as secondary guardian. He raised his eyebrows. Lena from years ago? I smiled faintly. Yes, she never left completely. She still remembers me. And she would never use the children as pawns. He didn't argue. He simply made notes, his pen scratching steadily across the paper. The mini twist came when Gregory pulled out a slim folder of bank statements I had nearly forgotten existed. He had kept meticulous records of my contributions to Lucas and Sophie's joint account. Funds for the mortgage, for vacations, even for the children's extracurriculars. Do you want this documented in the revision? He asked. I scanned truths Sophie could not control. Still, I knew this action carried weight. Once Sophie and Lucas discovered the shift, the storm would come. Yet instead of fear, I felt a strange anticipation. Because this time, when they looked for me, they would see not a silent shadow, but a woman holding the pen, not waiting for the story to be written for her. As I locked the safe, the question lingered in my mind like the toll of a distant bell. How would they react when the life they believed they built on their own was revealed to be mine to give, or to take away? 3 days after Christmas, the knock came. Not frantic, not angry, just hesitant, uncertain. I opened the door and there stood Lucas, my son. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. For a moment, he looked like the boy I once knew, the one who stayed after Little League to help gather baseballs, the one who called me after every long drive. But now he looked hollow, as though the foundation beneath him had shifted. Mom, he said quietly, stepping inside. He didn't embrace me. He sat on the couch like a guest, his shoulders heavy, his gaze fixed on the floor. I poured tea, jasmine, the one he used to wrinkle his nose at as a child. He didn't complain this time. Silence stretched between us until he finally spoke. She told me you were trying to control us, that you wanted to ruin my marriage. His voice cracked, not with anger, but with confusion. I looked at him steadily. And did I? He didn't answer. His silence was louder than words. I stood, walked to the cabinet, and retrieved a navy folder I had kept hidden for years. I laid it on the table, opened it, and slid it toward him. Bank statements, transfers, deposits, withdrawals. Each page carefully documented by Gregory, showing how often I had contributed to their home, their vacations, the children's education fund. Lucas's brow furrowed as he read, his hand trembling. I didn't know, he whispered. Then his eyes caught a line, a transfer into an account with only Sophie's name. Another, and another. His breath caught. She moved the money. His voice trailed into silence. I nodded slowly. The second property? It's in her name alone. You were never listed. Lucas's eyes widened, betrayal slicing through him like ice.
Built. Why didn't you say anything? His voice broke.
Because you weren't listening, I whispered. You had already chosen to hear her version of me. You let her words speak louder than my silence. He dropped his head into his hands, shaking it slowly.
She told me you didn't love her, that you judged her from the start.
I let out a long breath. She never gave me the chance to love her, Lucas. She judged me the second I opened my door. And you let her. He flinched at the words but didn't argue.
The silence that followed was raw, painful, yet cleansing. For the first time in years, truth sat in the room with us, undeniable. I slid a second folder toward him, this one slimmer, freshly signed. "I haven't cut you out," I said softly. "You are still my son, but I will not keep feeding a system that teaches me to disappear." He looked at the folder but didn't touch it. His chest rose and fell with the weight of recognition. His mother had boundaries now, boundaries no silence could erase. The tea between us grew cold. The house was still, but no longer empty. Lucas finally lifted his head, his voice barely audible. "What do I do now?" I didn't answer directly. Some lessons a son must learn himself. Instead, I asked a question that had burned in me for years. "Lucas, when did you stop believing in me?" His eyes met mine, haunted, and no reply came. That silence was answer enough. I leaned back, letting him sit in the unraveling of his illusions. I had no triumph in me, no satisfaction, only clarity. Betrayal had not only been mine, it was his as well. And that, perhaps, was the only way he would truly understand. As he left that evening, shoulders heavy, eyes hollow, I knew a storm was brewing. Sophie would not remain silent. She would rage, scheme, and demand. But this time, Lucas had seen the truth with his own eyes. The question was whether he would face it, or bury it again. And deep inside, I wondered. When Sophie realized the ground beneath her was no longer hers, how far would she go to claw it back? The storm didn't wait long. 2 nights after Lucas sat in my living room, my phone lit up like
Assumed ownership, when all along I had been the invisible scaffolding. Now, by one quiet signature, that scaffolding had been removed. Their world trembled. Not because I struck in anger, but because I had stopped holding it up. Midway through the chaos, the mini-twist revealed itself. A neighbor of theirs, an older woman I knew in passing, called me directly. "Marian, I don't know what's happening over there, but I saw the children crying through the window." Sophie was yelling on the phone. Lucas looked lost. Her voice wavered, torn between concern and judgment. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I thanked her, but inside I felt the sting of a familiar wound. Others would paint me as cruel, vindictive, but none of them had seen the years of being erased, the empty holidays, the photographs without me. None of them had felt what it meant to be written out of your own family's story. For them, this was sudden. For me, it was the conclusion of a long, silent erasure. That night, Lucas himself came to my door again. He looked worse than before, his coat wrinkled, his eyes red, his hands trembling. He didn't knock loudly, just a weak rap against the wood, as though even he questioned whether he deserved to be there. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "the kids are scared. Sophie, she doesn't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Please, please just fix this. Not for us, at least for the children." My heart twisted. Every instinct screamed to gather him into my arms, to rush to the grandchildren and warm them by my fire. But I held myself steady. For years I had rushed in, smoothed over, sacrificed my peace for their comfort. Each time, I disappeared a little more. Tonight, I could not vanish again. "I can't fix what isn't broken," I told him quietly. "What's happening isn't a punishment. It's a reminder of what you've taken for granted." Tears filled his eyes. "We didn't mean—" He cut himself off, realizing the weight of the lie. They hadn't meant to hurt me, perhaps, but they had never stopped. He begged then, voice raw. "Don't do this to us. Not now. It's Christmas." I could barely resist, but I remembered the unopened gifts still stacked in my closet, the pajamas folded by the fireplace, the years of invisibility. And I whispered, "For the children, yes, but not for Sophie, and not for you, until you choose truth over silence." He left without another word. I stood at the window afterward, watching his figure disappear into the snow. I thought of the children, of their small hands pressed to cold windows, their confusion in the dark house. My chest ached with guilt, with love, with fury all at once. Was I protecting them by setting boundaries, or harming them by letting their parents' choices ripple down? The question gnawed at me, sharp as the winter wind, and as I pulled the curtain shut, I knew the storm was not yet over. Sophie would not surrender control quietly. She would fight back with words, with lies, with every ounce of polished cruelty she possessed. And I couldn't help but wonder, when the final confrontation came, would Lucas stand beside her, or finally stand with me? The first morning in my new place, I woke to birdsong instead of silence. Not the drafty old house with its staircase and echoes of absence, but a modest cottage tucked within a quiet retirement community. 2 bedrooms, a garden, and a porch that caught the morning sun. I stepped outside barefoot, coffee in hand, and felt something I hadn't in years: contentment. I hadn't run away. I had simply stopped chasing. For so long, I had waited for invitations that never came, softened insults into jokes, disguised neglect as just being busy. But here, standing in the quiet warmth of my own space, I finally understood. Family isn't about being tolerated. It's about being valued. Lucas still called. Not every day, but enough. We met for lunch sometimes. I baked cookies for the children and left before anyone had to ask me to. Slowly, we rebuilt something different. Not the illusion of closeness Sophie had staged, but a quieter truth, fragile and real. The children loved visiting the new cottage, laughing as they fed birds in the garden, scattering crumbs that drew bright flashes of wings. In those moments, I remembered who I had been before Sophie's shadow stretched across everything. Sophie came once. She stood and considered writing back. Then I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't always require words. Sometimes it was simply choosing silence instead of reopening wounds. I painted again, sunflowers, lakes, abstract strokes that only made sense to me. Lena often joined, bringing cinnamon rolls and stories about her stubborn rescue cat. We didn't talk much about Lucas or Sophie anymore. Instead, we laughed, cooked, and took weekend drives just to watch the leaves change. One afternoon, as we passed an old bookstore we used to visit, she whispered, "I missed this." I smiled. Me too. It wasn't about rewriting history. It was about honoring the life that had been waiting for me all along. The children grew, and Lucas began to change too. He asked questions instead of repeating Sophie's answers. He listened without rushing to defend. Once, he thanked me, not for the money, not for the house, but for the silence. That quiet, he admitted, made me finally hear whose voice I'd been listening to all these years. I didn't cry, but inside, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt not erased, but restored. The final lesson was clear. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. And surrender wears you down until you no longer recognize yourself. By drawing lines, I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply redrawn the map, so I no longer lived outside of it. As I closed the journal I had been writing in, dated December 28th, I penned one last sentence. Freedom doesn't always come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence. I set the pen down with a steady hand. No applause, no triumphant finale, just truth. And truth, I had learned, was enough. Now I turn to you, listening to this story. How many of us keep giving until we vanish? How often do we stay quiet, mistaking patience for love, when in truth, we are teaching others how to forget us? Maybe you've lived your own version of this silence, waiting for a seat at a table that never had a chair for you. I want you to sit with this. Boundaries are not betrayal. They are the most powerful form of love.
For your